Welcome to Understand the Math. In this video, I'm going to teach you what an inverse function is and then show you examples of some inverse functions. We'll then find the inverse of a function from a table and from a graph. Let's get started. I'll start by explaining what an inverse function is. An inverse function is just a function that undoes the action of another function. I'll show you how this works. If we put an input into a function f, we get an output. If we want to undo what this function f did, what we're going to do is we're going to take our output and we're going to put it into our inverse function, and we get back the same input. We can think of this algebraically like this. Let's say we put an x into our function, and we get back an f of x. That's our output. To undo what our function did, we take this output f of x and we put it into our inverse function, and we get back the same input, which is x. Likewise, we can take our x and we can put it into our inverse function, and our output is f inverse of x. Now, if we want to undo what f inverse did, we take our f inverse and we put it into our function f, and then what pops out is our original input x. We can summarize all this into what we call properties of inverse functions. Our function is f of x, and our inverse function is f inverse of x, just like we saw above. Before we go on, I want to make a note that f inverse of x is not 1 over f of x. They are two entirely different things. I also want to make a note that not all functions have inverses. I have another video in this series which shows you how to determine if a function has an inverse or not. For now, we're just going to talk about inverse functions in general. The one property that you need to know about inverse functions is that f of f inverse of x is x. That just means if you put f inverse into f, you get back x. And then likewise, if you put f into f inverse, you get back x as well. I'm going to now show you some examples so that we can understand this a little bit better. The first one I'm going to do is with a number, and I'm going to take the number 2, and I'm going to put it into a function that we'll call f, and then I'm going to say that my function f turns our number 2 into the number 5. Algebraically, we can write this operation as f of 2 is equal to 5. Now, if we want to undo what our function did, we're going to take our number 5 and we're going to put it into a function that we're going to call f inverse. And what we're going to get back out is the number 2, which is the same number that we put into f. Algebraically, we can write this as f inverse of 5 is equal to 2. If we compare f and f inverse, I want you to notice that the x and y values just change. This x value became this y value, and this y value became this x value. Let's now look at another example that's a little bit more algebraic. This time, instead of putting in a number, we're going to put in a variable x, and our function f, I'm going to say is a function that just adds 2. So we're going to say f is equal to add 2. And then we have to think about what we get out. If we put in x and we add 2 to it, what we get back out is x plus 2. Algebraically, we say that f of x is equal to x plus 2. Now let's undo this function. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this x plus 2 and we're going to put it into our inverse function. And let's think about what our inverse function is going to do. If our original function adds 2, then our inverse function has to subtract 2. So when we put x plus 2 in and we subtract 2, we're going to have x plus 2 minus 2, which is going to give us just x, our same input. Algebraically, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, this function tells us that f inverse of x is we take whatever we put into our input and we subtract 2. So in our example, we had f inverse, and instead of putting in x, we put in x plus 2. So what we're going to get out is x plus 2 minus 2. Remember, whatever we put in here, we put in here, and this is just equal to x. Let's now walk through an example where we're going to find the inverse of a function from a table. Our example says to use the table to evaluate each expression, and the assumption is that f of x has an inverse. Let's look at our first example. That example tells us to evaluate f inverse of 2. Let's begin by letting f inverse of 2 be equal to x. That means that f of x is equal to 2. So what we want to do is we want to look up at our table and we want to find the value of x where f of x is equal to 2. So let's go up to our table and let's look at f of x and let's highlight 2. And the x value associated with this is 3 because f of 3 is equal to 2. So this tells us that x, which is f inverse of 2, is equal to 3. And that's our answer. I've written down here in pink what we just talked about. To find f inverse of a, where a is any number, what we're going to do is we're going to find the x value where f of x is equal to a. Let's now look at our second example. We want to evaluate f inverse of 6. So that means we want to find the x value where f of x is equal to 6. So let's highlight f of x is equal to 6, and then the x value is just 5. So we have f inverse of 6 is equal to 5. Let's look at an example that's a little bit more complicated. This example says we want to evaluate f inverse of f of 4. So there's kind of an extra step here. We first have to find f of 4. To find f of 4, we go up to our table and we find x is 4 and we see what that f value is. And that f value is 1. So this is equal to f inverse of f of 4, which is 1. Now we go ahead and we do what we were doing before. We want to find the x value where f of x is equal to 1. So let's highlight our 1, and then the x value is going to be 4. So this is going to be equal to 4. Let's now look at our fourth example. We want to find f of f inverse of 4. So what we're going to have to do first is find f inverse of 4. And before we do that, let me go ahead and erase some of our highlighting we have up here. Now we're ready to start. We want to find the x value where f of x is equal to 4. So here's where f of x is equal to 4, and so our x value is equal to 2. So this becomes f, and then f inverse of 4 we found was 2. Now we have to evaluate f of 2, and looking back up at our table, we see that f of 2 is equal to 4. Before we go on and do the last example, I want to look at example 3 and 4 again. Example 3 was f inverse of f of 4. We could have easily just used our property that we saw on the previous page that f inverse of f of 4 has to be equal to 4. Likewise, in example 4, f of f inverse of 4 also has to be equal to 4 because f and f inverse cancel each other out. Let's go ahead and use this now to do example 5. Example 5 says we want to find f of f inverse of 1. So we don't even have to look at the table for this. We can just use our property, and we can know that this is just going to equal 1 because f and f inverse are going to cancel each other out. Let's now do an example where we're going to find the inverse of a function from a graph. Just as in the previous example with the table, we're going to assume that our function has an inverse. Let's go down here and we're going to do our first example. Our first example says we want to evaluate f inverse of 1. That means we want to find the x value, and I have this written down here at the bottom. We want to find the value where f of x or y is equal to 1. So let's trace this over, and that's going to be this point right here. And that happens where x is equal to 1. Now let's look at our second example. We want to find f inverse of 3. So we want to find the x value where our function is equal to 3. So we go up here, we find that our y value is equal to 3, and we trace it over, and that's our point. And that point corresponds to an x value of 2. So this f inverse of 3 is just equal to 2. You might want to pause the video and see if you can do this last one. So our last example is we're going to evaluate f inverse of 4. So we want to find the x value where our function or our y value is equal to 4. So we're going to go up to 4 and we're going to trace over and then trace down. And that's going to be the point we're looking for. So that is going to be equal to 4. You should now be more comfortable with understanding what an inverse function is. In the next video in this series, I'm going to teach you how to find the inverse of a function algebraically.
If this video has been helpful to you, please consider subscribing to my channel. Keep believing in yourself and have a great rest of your day.